Sarab, Kama, welcome back. Today we're tackling a topic that's all about these hidden factors that influence performance. Now, leaders, particularly the higher up you go, we're dealing with more adaptive problems. And with adaptive problems, we see a lot of complexity. And a key well-researched factor that helps leaders navigate complexity is something called sense making. Now, today, given that what we do with a lot of teams is sense making, I thought we'd unpack what are some of the things that get in the way of really good sense making. And these hidden factors, even though leaders, they just have so much that they want to give. They're trying their best. They just can't work it out. And there's some elements that are missing. And what I'd love to do today is spend some deep time with you both unpacking, as I said, what are these hidden factors? So therefore we can help leaders with some tools to bring these to the surface and therefore get better personal and business outcomes. Before we get into it all, Kamara, I'd love to throw to you first. I mentioned sense making as a critical tool for a leader. Could you tell us what on earth that is?
Yeah, listen, sense making, essentially, it's what it sounds. It's making sense of the world we live in, specifically when it's uncertain, it's unclear, and where there's more complexity. It's um, leaders are constantly, when we work with them, making trying to understand the context within which they operate and the decisions they have to make. And some of the contexts are pretty simple, where they don't have to make a lot of sense. And in those contexts, and these contexts are in studies, they've been identified with the relationship of what causes what effect. So in a simple context within which the leaders operate, the cause and effect is well known by pretty much any sane person. So we don't need sense making. We just need some processes and instructions, and we go. Then there are other contexts whereby leaders, whereby the relationship between cause and effect is again known. However, it's not always known to everyone else. It requires expertise. So that's why if your car's making noise and you may or may not know what's causing that effect, so you have to take it to a mechanic who's an expert. And in health as well, we have to go to doctors or surgeons, all those things. Um, but then there's another context which is pretty common these days now, which is the complex context within which, once again, the relationship between the cause and effect, essentially, it cannot be determined in the real time, whereby because there are quite a few elements, there's an interplay with the elements, and they're constantly changing in the constant state of flux. So you cannot say, oh, this is causing that. In hindsight, yes, maybe we can see a broader picture and make an assessment. And in this complex context, this is where sense making becomes really important, whereby how do we pause, reflect, and see different pieces and see how they're behaving, and 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 ha- and regulate our urge to make quick fixes. So it's about navigating tensions, and also having this, making this space for understanding the perspectives of different stakeholders. And also the main thing is our capacity, or leaders' capacity, to hold to opposing truth at the same time. So allowing us to be uncomfortable, and being like an archaeologist, which is using your little brush to unearth those pieces and seeing, hang on, what is it trying to tell us, and what does it mean? And based on that narrative or story, we do experiments, and this sense making is a vital capacity for modern day leaders.
Two things stood out for me there. One was getting different perspectives and holding two conflicting thoughts at the same time. I think realistically for me, I don't hold two conflicting thoughts at the same time very often. And it's like you go in, and as a leader in an organization or as a captain on a sporting team, I have my thoughts. and I go in and I say, well, this is what we're going to do. Or if I do ask someone else for their opinion, it's like, oh, what if that conflicts with mine? Then what do I do? And that's something that stood out to me. Now, Sarah, another part of that, Kamara, is we've been working with a lot of organisations that are quite diverse. And when I mean diverse, range of things: gender, socioeconomic background, cultural background. There's a range there. Now, if we're getting a senior leadership group team together, and now we've got a whole lot of different perspectives and backgrounds trying to make sense, that sounds incredibly difficult. So for Sarab, I know there's a big movement which is in the right direction of whether it's having all these policies or gender equity, and in terms of pay, a lot of, excuse the terminology, but this is the way it's often phrased, is boxes that need to be ticked, is the way it's often looked at. I'd love to hear your thoughts on two parts here. One, can you talk a little bit more about what companies have to do in that space?
Yeah.
And two, what might be missing in terms of linking that back to sense making?
Yeah, look, it links really clearly because that's the emerging environment that a lot of chief executives or senior leaders, and particularly people who are charged with people and culture um, uh, portfolios in any organization, right? That's the emerging um, complex context that Cam was talking about, because it's not simple. It's not, hey, everyone thinks the same way, and we apply well-known and well-tried out kind of formulas to success. The dynamics of the workforce in Australia is significantly changing, and this is what Kamal was talking about, that change is slow, but it's impactful, right? And so now, and I actually first of all really empathize and acknowledge how hard this is for senior leaders, right? Because again, their idea of how we do things and how I grew up in the leadership that I enjoyed is not the leadership um, I'm actually going to dish out to the people, the new workforce, so to speak. So the pressures that we're under now, we talked about how not just the business environment is changing, how we respond to it also needs to change. And it's really difficult to take your eyes out of, my workforce data that I have to report to the WGA agency, right? So the Workforce Gender Equity Agency, that's annual data that we have to report on the composition of the workforce. Are there any pay gaps? Are there any gender gaps? These are all important things that we are doing. But to shift the dial from just reporting as a transactional thing to actually just go, like, let's make sense of this. But what are we doing? What's the game plan here? That's the shift we need to make, because again, in the environment, the business environment, that's always throwing up lots of challenges. It also throws up lots of opportunities. So if I use the analogy of playing a chessboard, so what the WGA now workforce numbers almost alert us to make sure is that, hey, we've got as many different types of chess pieces we've got, essentially, in this analogy. But if we keep that talent behind the basic pawn moves, they're going to be limited in how we use them. So even though you've got capacity and capability, but all you're doing is just reporting on, hey, I've got 2 rooks, I've got 2 bishops, I've got 2 knights, and I've got a king and a queen and a whole lot of pawns. That's not enough, right? So what we see in organizations that are really successful, that really leverage this, is they have the ability to open up the chessboard and have a strategy where each individual talent with its own characteristics and its own capacity is maximized for the benefit of the overall game plan.
Yeah,
That's
brilliant.
the thing that we have to now shift our dial from just the basic transactional reporting to this concept of talent management. And we have to make a lot of sense with that.
Yeah, and I can see with this talent management, diversity could almost be a double-edged sword because if we don't get it right, we're limiting people.
Yes.
So we might get the talent in the room, but from a cultural point of view, it can work both ways. In that, if we don't have diversity, you can get more groupthink. If we do have lots of diversity, sense making is really difficult. So what on earth, like, come on, can you maybe talk to what do we do with
I
diversity?
think, as you said, diversity is a double-edged sword. And for those of people who have more than one kids in their homes, they know they're dealing with diversity already, and especially on a Friday evening was a movie night, and we have to decide, hang on, or what movie you're going to watch today. There's a difference in opinion because more than one kids, two different ideas, and we have to navigate through that discussion. On top of that, if they have invited their friends over as well, and that becomes double the problem. So can you see how diversity can potentially contribute to an annoyance and problems before we even start towards a goal of enjoying a Friday evening? And imagine that in the workplace. How can that pan out where we invite different heads? Essentially, we're inviting different way of thinking. But when we do engage in these conversations, the brains are wired to think in essentially black or white. It takes conscious effort for us to create space for duality and willingness to hold different truths. And that's a capacity. It's not necessarily natural, but it can be built through skill, strategy, and effort.
Yeah, 100%. And if we look at this, so say there's a leadership team sitting around a table. There are chess pieces, if you like. So we're getting the chess pieces in the room, which is a great piece of progression compared to not getting the chess pieces in the room.
Yeah.
But now they're all on the board, I should say. The chess pieces are on the board. The way our brain is wired makes using those chess pieces in terms of our game plan and our strategy really difficult. Would that be right?
Hmm.
So I guess it probably a good starting point would be then to unpack, given this is across the board and it's not just one organization, this is part of human nature. Perhaps we can start with unpacking how this happens from a brain point of view. So why is it that leveraging diversity, I'm sure all our listeners will agree,
Hmm.
right? Like we need to get the chess pieces to work together well, otherwise we're not going to win the game. You're not winning a
Spot on.
game just sitting in your position. But what is it about our brain that makes this really difficult?
Essentially, listen, if you think about sense making is a required capacity because we're dealing in complex environment and context, and we know that there are some hidden figures in our brain or hidden factors in our brain that potentially come in the way. And they have been studied. And one of the things which a lot of us by now we know or may have heard about is the idea of heuristics. And heuristics are those hidden figures in the brain that potentially they're really helpful in many ways. They are shortcuts the brain uses to make quick assessments and quick decisions, especially in uncertain environments. And they are designed um, over a period of time for us to make sense in a very quick and easy manner and come up with a good enough response. And these mental shortcuts, they're helpful in many cases. They, however, at times they deviate away, take us away from the truth, especially when we utilize in social interactions. And in those moments, we make biased assessments. And those shortcuts or heuristics that are studied in psychology, they when they lead towards distortions or when they lead towards deviate us from the facts, this is where we become biased. So, and this is unconscious, this below our conscious awareness. we don't know that we have those heuristics. Even though we do studies in heuristic science, in the moment, we will never know that, hey, I'm being biased right now because of heuristics. In hindsight, we can. I can see your biases, I can see Sarah's biases, but I won't be able to see mine. And you can do the same thing as well for me, but you won't be able to see yours in the real time. So that's what essentially comes in the way and create biased assessment. And imagine when this happens when we have different heads and diversity around us and how it can pan out. Why? Because these bias assessments that link from these shortcuts called heuristics, they tell us how to think about each other. And unchecked, they can lead to generalized stereotypes. And these generalized stereotypes they're not cognitively made. They're just accepted unknowingly a lot of times, and that causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, so these stereotypes, you mentioned generalized beliefs. I mean, I don't know, Sarah, would you, when you think of the word stereotype,
Mm.
for me, there's often a kernel of truth associated with them. What are your thoughts on what Kamal said so far?
And that's a really important thing to acknowledge, right? Like, we don't just make up stuff because we're racist or we're bigoted or whatever, right? Because there are some experiences that we hold on to and we learn from, and then we create these mental shortcuts. So the brain, from a biological perspective, the brain's going to do what the brain always does, is push us towards efficiency rather than accuracy, because that's how we survive, right? So that's why these heuristics are made, and often these are made because we have experienced a kernel of truth. Like, there is some experiences that we've had, but because we kind of want to use that same formula and model to actually say everyone is now like that, it becomes a stereotype in that sense. But it's, again, what's important to learn from what just Kenmar just said is that yes, it's a more generalized frame that we put on to the view of the world and create that mental model in our head. So this is how this thing works, or this is how this person or this category of a person works, and it's efficient for me to think that way, even though it might not be accurate.
Yeah, perfect. So linking this back to why is sense making so hard? So if we're trying to work out a complex problem, and say if I have a stereotype that I'll use women just because I feel obviously quite attached to that and have had some experiences. If the stereotype in either, and it could be your head, Camo, yours, Sarah, or even my own,
Yeah.
is that women are too emotional to be assertive leaders, or women are more emotional than men. Say that could be my stereotype. Now, if it comes time for elevating a woman to a leadership position or getting their perspectives within the sense making, Kamal, can you maybe talk to how does that play out? So we've got the stereotype in our head. How does that play out where we might lead to some sort of action that might be biased towards that woman?
Yeah, listen, again, this stereotype around women are too emotional. It's again, as you said, there's a kernel of truth, and the kernel of truth is not exactly how it sounds. It's not that men, we are not emotional. We are as emotional as women, maybe more at times. The way we express it is very different to how the women they would liberally talk about the emotion, and men, because of cultural makeup, conditioning, expectations, and all those things, we experience the same emotions, but the way we showcase or talk about it is very different. And because of that, we are framed as, hey, men are more assertive because they're not emotional. Hey, she's more emotional. So again, it's what we see as opposed to what's under the hood here. Now, when these stereotypes are accepted willy-nilly and they are internalized by us, they can then progress into our emotions. they drive our feelings. So, and essentially, a lot of stereotypes can instigate some negative feelings, unfavorable feelings, feelings that would drive us to behave. And when we behave, and those behaviors could be seen as discrimination. So essentially, women are more emotional. Um, and I have three CVs for a very senior role, and one of them is of um, a, a a woman who is as qualified as the other two guys, the other two CVs. However, I'm going to now feel the prejudice. And a prejudice, interesting. This is where we start to become slight conscious, but we haven't really worked it out. What's contributing to that? So we're not 100% conscious, but we are. There's some level of consciousness of prejudice. Um, but then we, as human beings, we are not rational, but we can rationalize. We can rationalize anything. And as a result, so when I have the stereotype and I feel prejudice against women in choosing one or in filling this position, I justify why. And subconsciously, this role requires making hard decisions, and it's going to be tough at times. Women are emotional. I may as well choose this. And I may not even verbalize that in my mind. It's just the judgment my brain makes and nudges me towards choosing that. And when you ask me, why have you chosen, I give me a really good rational justification, which hard to dismiss at times. And that's how it pans out.
Yeah, right. So it's almost like we have these mental maps which basically describe how the world works. These mental maps are based on experience, or cultural conditioning, and we go, well, men are more assertive. Leadership, part of our map, good leaders are assertive. And therefore, this is all subconscious, right? So we're not consciously, not often, very rare are we consciously making these decisions, but the stereotype produces that prejudice, which is then the feeling of, "Oof, I'm not sure this woman is the right person. It's not quite the right fit."
Yeah.
And then the discrimination piece comes in. And the numbers actually reflect that. I did do a little bit of research. So, and it's not just women. So if we can use, for example, non-Anglo names are 40% less likely to get an interview with the same resume.
Yeah. I think that was one of the Australian studies, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then women with the same resume will get 12 to 15% lower pay. So, and these are quite strict experiments. So we're discounting for it's not quite in the real world. So this is presenting, hey, Sarah and Kamala, I'm going to give you the same resumes, just we're just going to randomize names on the top of them, and then getting an outcome on the back of that. So this is in Australian context. And then within that, there's also the internalized bias, which I think we'll get to down the track. But a common one I know that's floating around is when, say, there's 5 or 6 key competencies required for the job.
Yeah.
Often women will go, oh, I've only got 4 out of 6, I can't apply. And it's that internalized, oh, I'm not quite there yet. I don't have it all. Whereas men will go, yeah, I've got 2, I'm good. Let's give it a crack. Obviously, these are, again, stereotypes, overgeneralized.
Yeah, that's right. So let's not overgeneralize that
Exactly,
even, right?
yeah.
Because there'll be either or on the either side. But I think the one more complexity or aspect of complexity that Kama and you were just chatting about is that these stereotypes aren't just limited to our own individual experiences. They can be passed on from one to the other, especially, like we say, if you're viewed as a credible authority, it can be passed on. And I'm embarrassed to say, I won't go into too detail because we were just driving the other day and our son, the 10-year-old in the back seat, said something. And I went, wow, okay. That he was also making commentary on somebody else's driving on the road. And I said, where does that come from? And I looked at Jasmine and I've said, Acom, where did you learn that from? Like, that's just not true. It's rude to say that. And then it was embarrassing. Like I felt, wow, what are we teaching this boy? Because it's not what we want him to actually have. But these are formed even at a young age, and in a workplace setting, just an offhand comment by a senior leader or someone might then be viewed as, oh, that's how the world works. And unconsciously I'm adopting that. So like as complex as what Kanma was saying earlier, there's another element to it that we just have to be a bit more conscious and mindful of what we say and how that can impact other people's mindsets.
Yeah, 100%. And I know with the like from a young age, how these comments, and sometimes you don't even mean to be making them. But I know growing up, I feel like I tick a lot of diversity boxes. But growing up in Australia and having my full name is Bavisha, no one could say it. So I had 50 million different nicknames, and one of the nicknames I actually ended up getting was Mary. Which just shout out to Emma King, one of my best mates. And so Mary came along because one of my teammates' fathers innocently was like, "That's really hard to say in the field. Why don't you just have a simple name like Mary?" And he didn't have any bad intent behind it. But then I internalized that to go, "Hey, my name's really difficult. I'm different here."
Mm.
So that internalization of it. So if I'm different, if I need to fit in, I hated the name Mary. Or Barbie doll was another one I got. Because Barbie sounds like Barbie. And I didn't like it. But you then start taking that on. And I'm talking probably not far off ACOM's age, 13, 14-year-olds where it starts. And you start to internalize that, right? And I know, Kamwa, you have a pretty funny story as well. Funny or fascinating is probably a better word about your name or anything
Yeah, no,
else.
essentially,
Yeah.
it reminded me of when you were giving us some stats around resumes. Essentially, I have two different identities I live by, and those identities are formed as a result of me trying to fit in and also survive. And so many years ago, almost 20 years ago, 21 years ago, I moved from Perth to live in London for some time. One of my very good friends, Kim, she forced me to go there, and because she had a great time. And there I was, and really looking forward to being part of the culture and explore a lot of things. Unfortunately, I struggled to find a job those many years ago. And it was interesting. I had a really good job here in Perth, and I was doing quite well for a young person. And a lot of people told me, don't go, family and some friends. However, Kim, she thought, nah, and I think that's the best thing she did, by the way. And there I was. However, I started to struggle, and I would send around 20 CVs every day, and I'll hardly get a phone call back from recruitment agencies. And it went there for some time and started doubting, have I done the right thing? All the people were telling me to stay back. I should have listened to them. And I remember one day I was having catching up with some friends I made and some people I knew already in a pub, and there were some other friends as well that knew my friends. And one of them, or a couple, there was a couple, and they were the owners of a recruitment agency, but not in London, outside of London. They were visiting, and we were randomly connected. So I was telling my tale of my struggles of not getting a job and all those things, and they were nice enough. They said, "Hey, listen, we don't work in your industry, Kamwa. We are more blue collar. However, if anything, we can help you by looking at your CV and giving you some feedback. So how do you make it more English centric? If it's more Australian centric, we can give you that feedback." I said, "No, that'd be great. Any help is great." I was desperate, and I gave my CV next day, emailed, and after a few days, I got a phone call from the person, and she said, "Oh, Cam, what? Listen, I've got what the problem with this CV," and I was, "Oh, tell me." I was ready to change the format and anything, and it said, "Yeah, they got one problem." So what's that? It's your name. I was like, "What?" Yeah, Canva. That's the reason you're not getting a lot of and I'm like, "What?" By that time I had enough rapport with her, and and she and her husband again, they're from the English descent themselves, and they gave me this feedback, and they said, I'm sorry, but when hundreds of CVs are sieved through by recruitment agents, they have seconds to make a decision to come up with 3 or 4 CVs and pass on to their clients. Your name potentially could be coming in the way. I felt slight confused, undermined, and lots of different feelings. However, I was desperate. And she said, try a different name, just experiment. I said, what different name? I said, I have a name that people call me at home, but that's a bit silly now. I don't want to put on my CV. And just put, doesn't matter, Cam. I just put anything. Put Kenneth, put Ken. I said, okay. So I put my name Ken. Guess what? I
No
have
way.
then started getting phone calls and I landed up some really good jobs. And I was there for 1 year. I ended up there for more than 5.5 years. The interesting thing is, I met my now husband, who's Italian, there in Italy. Everyone in London, my colleagues, my friends, they knew me as Ken because my first job is that's where I started making friends, and I was known as Ken officially. So from there, I was introduced to other people. They knew me as Ken. Eventually, in Italy, Ken. So till today, all my Italian family, extended family, all the cousins, uncles, aunties, all my friends call me as Ken.
There you go, folks. Like this is world exclusive. I'm not sure whether you've actually planned this podcast this way, but you've just revealed to the world that Corporate Sherpa's got a Ken and Barbie.
Oh my God, I didn't even make that link.
Well,
Talk about stereotypes.
it's,
How did I not make that link?
well,
Yeah.
listening to the story, and I'll go. Well, you've been called a Barbie, and Kamwa's been called Ken. So it was okay, Ken and Barbie. This is who we are. But look, as I just want to make light of this. I'm sure it provides a bit of a giggle to people listening. But the seriousness of this is both of you said it was confusing, it was undermining, and Barbie, you said you didn't like it. And like as you grow and mature and get more confidence about yourself and the self concept, yeah, you're okay to verbalize that, but and actually acknowledge that. But imagine people who are exposed to this who still want to fit in, get a job. So the migrant communities that we actually attract, what we started off with, is the characteristic of the Australian workforce is changing. And if we don't pause and reflect on the seriousness of this, that performance then suffers because the withdrawal happens from there on. So this is like these are personal stories that you've both just said. And it's important that if I'm a head of people and culture, then I'm just going, actually, yes, it might be innocent with well intention for both of you to be accepted with anglicized names or uh, names that are easier to pronounce, and people will then, I'm hoping, will interact with you more. It actually has um, an unwanted consequence, right? So that's the point that we want to actually just raise to people's awareness as well, is to say actually it is more complex than a very simplistic solution.
And I think the key thing here is no one's fault here. You've been called Mary, I've been called whatever. It's no one's fault. If you think about in my example, the person who would sift through hundreds of CVs, that person's doing the best job possible. And they have KPIs, they have really beautiful intentions. They need to make a quick assessment and show the best case forward to the client and continue to have a business. But remember how we talked about we have heuristics, we have shortcuts, and one of the shortcuts is called the in-group bias. So, and that shortcuts essentially gets us to make a quick assessment of our environment, and anything that we perceive to be in our in-group, we elevate that. So it's the intentions are honorable. The way it pans out, as Sarab say, it can be detrimental at times or a lot of times.
Yeah, and it's super fascinating. I think a lot of the time, as you say, it's a shortcut, right? In group bias. We're not consciously thinking of this. So my guess is 90% of what we see in the workplace in terms of how these implicit biases impact performance and our ability to, one, onboard talent, but two, once we've got the talent on the board, how do we use it and elevate it really well? But one of the constraints that get in the way is that we don't know we're doing it. It happens so quickly.
Yes.
And it's not always a straight up discriminations. In fact, that's very rare in Australian context.
Yeah.
It's more these little things that happen over and over and over again. As leaders, we don't even know we're doing them. And sometimes when you're on the receiving end, you don't really know you're receiving it in the moment because they're so small. And these, which the term is called microaggressions, which is becoming more and more popular. Cam, I'd actually love you to talk us through what microaggressions are and perhaps give a few examples first, because I think this is where we can really dial into. This is the bit from the context at the start where leaders are having an impact on performance and they don't know they're doing it. Often it's through these microaggressions.
Yeah, the interesting thing is we are becoming more aware of our discrimination, organizationally speaking, and we're making efforts to not discriminate. There's policies, procedures, frameworks that deter us to do so. Have we eradicated that? No, but we are on the right track. In saying so, when we do not discriminate and we end up collecting heads which demonstrate diversity, the discrimination comes in, as you mentioned, these very micro ways. And these micro ways are the everyday slights, snubs, or insults that we project in the way we interact with each other and towards a marginalized group. And that could be based on a gender or race or background or also age as well. Millennials and older people, and also our ability and disabilities and all those things as well. And the micro here refers to the frequency and not the intensity. And these microaggressions can are largely unconscious. We don't realize we're doing them. And generally they do come from we're not intend to be microaggressive, but they do come from as a result of the stereotypes we deeply held. And microaggressions come, there are three kinds of microaggressions we know. There's micro invalidation and also micro insults and micro assaults. They differ in terms of how conscious are we or how subconscious. Micro assaults are very conscious. We consciously project them towards each other people. However, micro insults, where we and micro invalidations, more subconscious. But the thing is, they're so small, but because they happen a lot of times people who are receiving these, they may not fully comprehend, but they feel something. And one is okay, two is okay, three is okay. And psychologists call them as death by a thousand cuts. And this has a huge impact on our the way we see ourselves, the way we make sense, the way our own self-esteem, and how we project ourselves on others, especially when we have to perform. So it's a tricky one, but it happens a lot because of stereotypes and shortcuts the brain does for us.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think it'd be good to go through some examples of what a microaggression looks like. Something that came to mind as you were talking there for me was particularly in my early 20s, I was often would go to family functions and well-intentioned people at that big, oh, how's your cricket going? I'm like, yeah, really good. I'm doing this, doing that, getting closer to being completely full-time, just starting out my career. And they'll be, oh, that's nice. What's next?
Yeah.
And rather than, and my, often I'd be in my head, I'm thinking, well, if I was a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, would you go, oh, that's nice. What's next? I understand now, I'm a bit older and you can't play forever, but at the time, the feeling you get is uncomfortable. And in fact, I used to get quite triggered by it, and then I'd disengage. Would that be a good example?
Yeah, look, I was going to actually bring that up where
Yeah.
you had that conversation with me not long ago to say that's because that's exactly what I did to you. Like as you were transitioning out from cricket, and I was just going, okay, now this is the new place, a new work, and blah blah blah. And in my own head, it was humorous and well intentioned, but what I really want to stress on here is that having that psychological safety or that relationship and that bond that you said, Sarab, when you do this triggers me because you've just invalidated my whole professional career, which I've dedicated my life to. And I remember we're playing golf together, and I've just gone, "Oh my God, that is so true." Even though, like Emma said, it was unconscious, but the impact was there, and I needed to own the impact, right? Of that, because and if that's you know that the whole meaning of what we were just saying earlier, it's not the intensity but the frequency of it. That could just be the last thing you went, oh, here I go again, new setting, and I'm still getting snubs and slides
Yeah.
on exactly that. But the other part of that, Barbie, is I also want to acknowledge that I think about that often now. I am so conscious of it to say, okay, that is a valid career choice, and it's an important, prestigious career choice to make. And so it needs to be respected in that manner. So again, it's the talent, like you go back to the chessboard, it's there, and there's so much we can leverage from that. It needs to be celebrated as opposed to minimized.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a good point to make where it's a two-way street. Like my job, if I didn't bring that up to you and continued on, just well, Sarab's the boss. He could say that's part of like banter. Oh, it's just banter. Toughen up. That's the common one that goes in my head anyway, and I'm assuming I'm not the only one. But if I hadn't brought that up with you, I already felt a little bit of annoyance, and I wanted to disengage a little bit, or I didn't want to share what was happening outside of Sherpas with you, and I could feel that little bit of tension starting, and that's where I was like, no, that's not what our values are. Firstly, to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
And we've got to have that conversation. And then on the other side, you own the impact of it. The intention, and that's the key point I want to make here, is your intention was you never had any bad intention there. It was a bit of a laugh and a bit of a joke. And in fact, my guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, you were like, "No, you're one of us, mate. Get on board."
Correct. Correct. Like the intention was completely different. The intention was, we want you here full time, and we want you with us, and we want all of you and the best of you. That was the intention. But how, again, that's the thing. What I'm trying to stress here is that there are some unintended consequences that are largely unconscious, but they still have an impact. And that's where we need to be more mindful.
Yeah, 100%. And what I'd love to do is actually just double click on how we can be better at having those conversations. Before that, though, just for the sake of the listeners, Kamwa, could you talk us through some examples of microaggressions, whether they're in the three categories or just generally, just so people can, I think right here, right now, we have an opportunity to lift the awareness. Because even when you first talked through some of this, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was and now that I think about it, I've actually really invalidated someone and I didn't mean to. So could you just talk to that and with the idea of bringing to the surface some things that can be microaggressions?
Yeah, listen, for example, if you were to talk about something that's impacting you, and I tell you, hey, Bobby, listen, don't worry about it, don't be sensitive, and you could be overthinking about it, or how could you reframe it? I get you to move on without validating your experience, and that's something that we see a lot. And we justify. We're really good in justifying our stance. That's why we're human beings. And or we may. I grew up in an environment where grown-ups would say, "Don't be a girl. Don't cry. You're not a girl." I got again. I'm hoping this doesn't happen a lot. However, in our siblings, that's how we grew up with. In um, in organizational setting as well, we will introduce, for example, a senior male leader, if they're introducing um, um, a junior person, and if she happens to be a female, they will say, "Oh, she's the boss here. Oh, she's the office mother." And essentially, these are subtle ways. It's not about their skills and capacity and their value. It's about who they are. And in from their point of view, they're trying to make them feel important. But there is a cost in how they interpret those things. And there's so many of them. They're so subtle. By even if you hear them, they don't sound big. Sometimes not worth even talking about it, but they just all add up, and that becomes a problem.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It becomes a problem. So if we come back to, right, we've got the chess pieces on the board, but we're seeing anemic outcomes. And this is something that keeps leaders awake at night. I've got the talent, I've got diversity, we've got the human capital, if you like. However, it's not really working well together. And often with these microaggressions, if they're done over and over and over again, this can lead to what we call the golem effect, which is a well-researched effect where low expectations of people based on some of our stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, leading into microaggressions, we can have low expectations on someone just because of what they look like. It can also be of past behaviours that we've seen. And that actually leads to low performance. And on the other side of it, the good news is that there's actually the Pygmalion effect, where high expectations of someone leads to high performance. Now, the key here that I'd love to unpack is that we can't get rid of our biases. Even us, having done so much research, and the researchers who actually do the studies on bias, they're still biased, right?
It's a human condition.
It's a human condition.
That's right. It's part of being a human.
But the skill set here, when we talk about the ability to play chess and your best chess players in the world, they have a skill set. Now, the skill set for leaders is, despite our biases, how can we elicit this Pygmalion effect where, despite diversity around the table, despite expectations that we might have, these shortcuts in our brain, we can lead consciously with high expectations. We can still call a spade, and we can elevate performance at the same time with the whole concept of diversity add now. And this becomes a superpower.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned golem effect and Pygmalion. So essentially, these are well-studied psychological aspects whereby they have seen that the expectations, especially expectations from authority, the helpful expectations or unhelpful expectations, have a huge impact on how people show up, their own identity, their own self-esteem, and their performance as well. So let's say if I'm an authority, or if you perceive I'm a credible authority for you, in my mind, based on my stereotypes, I may have expectations from you, or I may have beliefs around you, and I'll transmit my beliefs subconsciously over a period of time, again and again and again. And the way it works out, those behaviors, those subtle micro behaviors that I will project towards you as a result of my expectations, helpful or unhelpful, will have a huge impact that you will live up to my expectations, and you will end up being like that. Another very sobering study that was done, which is, I find it really sad, but it turned around a legislation in America in 40s, I believe, was the study of, and by the way, before I tell you the study, so when I have helpful expectations of you in my mind, that, hey, Bobby, I think Bobby is good, and I project my belief about you being good through my everyday interactions, and you end up living up to my expectation. That, in studies, is called the Pygmalion effect. But if I have a different belief based on my stereotype, or you're a woman, you are this, you're that from background, all those things, you're young, you all those things, that belief will be transmitted to my behavior, and that will have an impact on your self-esteem and how you see yourself and how you see our relationship. And that impact is called the golem impact. The golem is the impact on unhealthful beliefs and how it has an impact on people's self-esteem and performance. And this study talks, there's a strong link of golem effect here, and it's called the Clark's good doll, bad doll study. And this study, the purpose of the study was essentially to identify the psychological impact the physical segregations can have in schools, specifically towards African American kids. And imagine these are like young kids. They're like between 3 to 5, 7 years old. And these kids are interviewed, and they're asked to choose between two dolls, a black doll or a white doll. And a lot of them will choose a white doll to play with. And then they will be asked, which is the good doll? And most of them will choose the white doll. Which is a mean doll? And most of them will choose the black doll. Which one? And so there were positive words and negative words, and they asked questions. And most of the positivity were, and these were the African American kids, by the way, young kids. They associated all the goodness of human nature to the white doll, and all the opposite to the black doll. And the last question that was posed to them, what do you think you look like? And this is where there's a dissonance. Well, hang on. I said all these bad things about this, but actually, I look like this black doll. So, and so that has a huge insight in terms of, and that became a cornerstone landmark study that was presented in the Brown versus Department of Education in Supreme Court, and that turned around the whole and made a desegregation of schooling in America. Because that it is a study showed that how the physical and segregation and also the prejudice can have a huge impact on people's own self-esteem and how they perceive themselves. I'm not good enough, and they haven't even lived yet. They're 5 years old. They're still making sense. They already have an idea. I'm a mean person. I'm not good enough, and they have a whole life to live now. So can you see how our stereotypes, and it's not only about race, it could be about all different aspects. We project them through our subconscious behaviors, microaggressions, or all those things we discuss, and the other person lives up to that belief. And that's a damaging thing. And the opposite is true. Helpful beliefs, more conscious beliefs around someone's potentiality, over a period of time allow them to live up to that new belief. So, and that's the black and white of the unconscious bias world we talk about.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. And it makes me think of my parents, actually, who grew up in apartheid in Southern Africa anyway. And I know my mum talks about it. They had the white schools, they had the black schools, and then they had the everything else schools. And she had no choice. You go to that school. But I guess the main point here, it's not necessarily about race, or it's actually about what happens from the internalization of these beliefs. So when we internalize the low expectations that are given from subconscious cues, that's when there's a problem. So back to the chessboard, like in organisational settings, it plays out in a similar way. Would that be right?
Yeah, and look, the critical part is that it's repeated and it's everyday interactions, then will lead to these beliefs being taken on, and that it's like, in that sense, you know, stereotypes and so forth, and can be we say helpful or unhelpful. They could be in your favor or not in your favor, right? So there are, it goes both ways, and that's the what you originally said. It's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you touched on there, Kamara, is that the opposite can also be true. So it's not just this golem effect where low expectations, if unchecked, often subconsciously when we're talking about microaggressions, etc., we see the golem effect where we don't know we're doing it. We hold low expectations for someone. Our subconscious cues, we may not give them as many stretch opportunities. We may not ask them to speak up enough. We may not actually give them the opportunity to go and take on something new and lead a project subconsciously, all very small things. And as a result, the internalisation might be, I'm not good enough to be here. Oh, I'm just the office mum. I'll get coffees for everyone and teas and bake a cake and bring it in, but my credibility as a professional is limited. But on the other side of it, there's a Pygmalion effect. And this is the one that I'm so fascinated by, because if we go at the opposite and lead with more curiosity and potentiality, as you say, well, what potential do you hold?
Yeah.
Like you, Sarah, might be different to me. You are different to me. But what's the potential here?
Yeah, and look, even if you put the lens of a leader seeing the potential in other people, right? Because we all live with our own blind spots,
Yeah.
right? And we're not the same person we were professionally or otherwise 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago when we first started. We're not the same person. We learn and grow every day, still with so many blind spots. And that's where, if you can tap in as a very conscious leader to go, but what's the potential of this person in a different setting that's yet to come? That's where you use your creativity and your imagination to the fullest and leverage each other. So again, there's a lot of merit, Barbie, in, I do want to go back to this concept of talent management or talent progression, where if we can lift our kind of busyness out of transactional, reporting of workforce data numbers and this, that, the other, to go, actually, just around the corner, there is a solution that we need to tap into, which is how do we actually clearly and explicitly focus on ensuring the talent that we have. First, it's with a lens of attracting the best talent, keeping the best talent engaged, and getting the best out of not just the individual, but the interactions between the talent. Now, there's a lot to be said about using Pygmalion effect or the Pygmalion construct and and learning from that to go, well, what if everyone was able to be viewed in that lens, and then they all lived up to those expectations, and that then protects us and ensures how we thrive in an ever-changing landscape of shifting cultural norms, shifting expectations, and what the digital transformation is doing to our business aspect.
So what I'd love to do, Sarah, if you want to talk to, firstly, your experience of either the golem or Pygmalion effect and how you've seen that play out in the business world.
Yeah, look, perhaps I should start with a story where, on a personal note, this is how I saw both of them being applied to me. I was at Perth Children's Hospital 4 or 5 years ago with ACOM, right, for a couple of weeks, and as a routine, I'd sort of go down at 10 o'clock after the doctor's visited to go down and said, this is just adult time alone. Just need to have a coffee, and let him in his own room with the cartoons on. So I went down to that little Lion cafe at the PCH, and the person serving me assumed I was wearing a white shirt and a blue turban. The person assuming me or serving me assumed that I was one of the medical doctors, and she applied a discount for the coffee. And I said, no, I'm one of the dads. So that was, in her own mind, a person wearing a white shirt and a turban is a medical doctor, stereotyped. So I said, no, I'm just a dad. So I got my coffee. I went outside. The green pillars. I was leaning against beautiful sunshine, and I noticed this elderly couple making their way towards me. And I said good morning, and she said the lady said good morning as well, and she smiled and awkward paused, and then she said, uh, "Don't want to rush you, but when you're done with your coffee, can you drive us to Netherlands?" And then again, stereotyped as a taxi driver because she thought I was confused. She stereotyped me as a taxi driver, blue turban, white shirt. So can you
Yeah.
just see how innocent uh, these things can be in their intention, but both of them can be applied to the same experience? And that's really fascinating. Is the low expectation or the high expectation should be a conscious choice, as opposed to an unconscious way of being, right? So I think that the moral of the story is nothing more than just 20 meters in a glass door can make a world of difference, right? Same experience, but in a different setting, you're seen differently. But how it applies in the workplace is, and this is where I want to. It's been a long time, but I've been out of serving in the border force for a long time. But my first day there, I I I, I experienced a golem effect, to say celebrating diversity, and Bobby, I'm talking about Kema in the mid 90s. Like how far has the cultural shift been since then in Australia? So my first day, while we were being measured for uniforms, there was a couple of tailors there, and the class of 30 cadets, all being measured for different shirt sizes and trousers and shoes and all that sort of stuff. While I was part of that space, I got called out by one of the senior officers and said, "Mr. Singh, there's something very important and sensitive that we have to talk to you about. Do you have 5 minutes?" uh, Clayton's request of 5 minutes. I've got all the time, man. This is and again, like the nervousness and the anxiety of a young 20-something person, first job and lots of expectations, and this is kind of before the internet, right? And kind of took off. But I'm just going, something's wrong. Like they've decided I probably don't fit the mold. I look different. And I was taken into a room no different to this, in a large square, kind of rectangular table. Four other officers with more stripes on their shoulders said, "Please have a seat." And one of the balding senior officers said, "Mr. Singh, there's something very sensitive we need to talk to you about. We have made a note that you're a practicing Sikh. You wear a turban." And then he leaned back and pulled out one of those big cork boards with the swatches of cloths on them, and he said, "We would like you to um, select a color of the turban, a uniform turban, unless or until you have a preference or religious reason why you choose a particular color turban." And he goes, one of our requirements is that for the Australian uniform, the material has to be produced in Australia. It can't be from overseas. And these are the only limited choices of colors that we have. And I on that day I chose navy blue, and to this date at work, I only choose to wear a navy blue turban. But can you just see that in that culture and in that space, that was offered to a young, nervous person who was not long into migrating to Australia, trying to fit in, looking different. And my career never looked back, because the generosity and the consciousness of those officers, who probably were predisposed to working with lots of diversity and travelers coming into Australia, had a bit more awareness and had a bit more of a skill set that Kamal was talking about, that got the best out of this individual piece of talent.
Yeah, so what could have been a golem effect had they, when you said you were nervous, what have I done? I don't fit in here. And if they hadn't made that decision, there could have been some low expectations and stereotypes that led to some low expectations about how you could perform, potentially.
Absolutely.
But by giving you the opportunity to pick a color for the turban. It's like, hey, you belong here, and hey, we're actually going to empower you. So what's important to you? And it's that sense of almost leading with curiosity.
And you know, like I wasn't the smartest or the sharpest knife in the drawer, right? So, but the fact that I got the acceptance, the fact that I got in that group of cadets, I felt I belong. This is me. This is my moment to shine. That Pygmalion effect is I'm living up to these high expectations of these people. So I worked harder, stayed longer to study legislation. I was more conscious of doing really well that I didn't apply at school,
Yeah.
but I applied in that workplace. And that's the difference where they managed to get all of my endeavor and all of the dedication to learning in that moment. And therefore, that led to better performance. That led to additional opportunities and
Yeah.
a better career.
Yeah, it's a great point. And if I can say this quite explicitly, I think this is the key takeaway here, is that we have the opportunity, despite the talent or whatever talent is on the table, whether it's the best your A team, whether you're through external circumstances, you're with your D team, whatever talent, whatever heads you have on the table, by leading with curiosity and what is the potential that you bring and holding that high expectation, you have the opportunity to excel.
Yeah.
And it's not just transactional. We need to bring, or we have to bring people in, is one mindset, and the other one is, oh, we've got our people in the door, fantastic.
And let's hope.
Let's hope. Right. Now, one thing in terms of I suppose the tools are really important here. So we need to actually empower leaders with the tools of, now how do I consciously enable the Pygmalion effect instead of letting the golem effect maybe happen? And Kamar, I know there's a beautiful tool for leaders in terms of enabling a mentor mindset where they have this capacity that even when things aren't going well, you can elicit this Pygmalion effect. Could you talk to that, please?
Yeah, essentially in the whole Pygmalion effect, the very first study that was done around was with school kids, and how strong expectations around teachers for some kids impacted in a way that teachers develop higher expectations towards a group of kids. And those high expectations allowed teachers to share feedback in a warm manner, but still highlighting the criticality of the feedback at times, versus other kids who were not seen as of high potential. They will still get the feedback, same feedback, critical feedback, was, however, not as warm. It will be more critical, black and white, to the point. And that had a huge impact on these children developing or not developing their IQ as well over a period of time. So bringing back to the current times, there's a framework which we subscribe to, developed by David Yeager, and which taps into this Pygmalion effect. And this framework talks about when we as leaders need to share feedback, give our perspectives, which are going to be critical, mindful that my stereotypes may play out, and I may or may not be conscious at times. So one design or one framework that can allow me to minimize my chances of executing those stereotypes that I may have around you unconsciously is essentially, before I give you the critical perspective I have around your performance, I first of all let you know of my high standards I have of you. I spell it out. So let's say I need to give you feedback, Bobby, and I start that by eliciting, being very clearly articulating, Bobby, I have very high standards of you. And I hold those high standards Why? That's the second part now. I think highly of you. I see there's a lot of potential in you. And I would like to serve you, support you, guide you, lead you, all those things to bring that out. And that's why I have very high standards of you. Given that I think highly of you and you have a lot of potential that needs to be tapped, I would like to bring your attention to this thing that you just recently done, and let's talk about it. And this is where I can be black and white and be critical about these are some of the things that are done, or these are some of the things were overlooked, all those things. And the last thing is we discuss, given the high standards I have of you and others, and given the potentiality I see in you, and given some gaps in current performance, let's talk about how do we support each other and how I support you. Is it the systems, processes, or anything else that we can provide to help you move towards this potential that you already have in you? Now, so what it does, I'm still be critical, calling spade a spade, no wishy-washy stuff here, but at the same time, as a credible authority, I'm letting you know that you have in you. I can see it, and I'm going to help bring that out. So this articulating of high standards and potentiality before serving the critical feedback, I'm mindful we don't confuse this into the sandwich we talk about, and that it's not put the good stuff and bad stuff afterwards, and it's not about that. It's well studied and researched by David Yeager's team, and it connects really well to the work of growth mindset as well. So there's a really good data around this as well. So it's not about being nice. It's about saying, you're not there yet, but you have a lot of potential. I have this frame of potentiality. I'm not being nice, but I'm telling you, because we all have potential, guys. We all have potential. It's about how do we take it out. So this framework is being named as the WISE feedback, which I believe is a very powerful way forward for leaders to get the best out of each other, especially in a diverse group when we have to call spade a spade.
Yeah, fascinating. And one of the things I've always struggled with is when you have to give feedback to someone, the intention is to help them grow, to help team performance grow. But traditional ways, as you say, if you call a spade without actually having this framework around it, you're killing their status. They're probably disengaging from you. Knowing amygdala and the negative bias, which we spoke about at length in a previous podcast, which I can link in, they're going to be ruminating on the old sandwich feedback. It doesn't matter what the bread is. What you put in the middle is what you're ruminating on. Whereas this is where you can do both. And in fact, I've been sharing this mindset with my partner, who's a school teacher, and some of her friends as well. And they're like, we need this in schools because that's our job. As teachers, that's their job. And I'd almost argue as leaders, that's our job too.
It has like the two critical things it has from the intention of the person providing that perspective or that feedback is compassion and frankness, that candor that people actually need.
Yes.
So if I'm falling short of a mark, I actually need someone to bring that to my attention, but with compassion. As opposed to obnoxiousness, which I'm just going to tell you how it is, mate, and you live with it. So I think that's the key part, and I think if I can request leaders to be really conscious of, is they pre-frame to that meeting, right? Which is, what is the intention you coming to that meeting for? Is it to actually help the other person, or to just get a better performance from them because you need a better performance from them? That actually is a very simple, subtle thing in the being conscious of it before you have that meeting and before you actually step into that meeting to say, really, am I, like, you've got to consciously challenge yourself and go, what am I just wanting this because it serves my purpose, or am I wanting this because it actually genuinely helps develop that individual?
Yes.
And all these micro behaviors that we then display will be aligned to one or the other. The tone of voice, the words we choose, the body language, the facial expressions, all of them will be naturally aligned to one or the other, but intention.
And you're right, Sarah, because if I think about it, if you're talking to someone, you can't possibly be conscious of every single body language, your tone of voice. It's impossible to be conscious in the moment of exactly what you're doing. So by pre-framing, so before you come in, it's checking that intention. It's having quite a clear, right, I want to elicit the Pygmalion effect here. What is the potential?
Yeah.
Bring curiosity. And that concept we speak about so often is listening to learn. So I'm not going in this to get my point across. I really want to understand, and be curious.
Yeah.
And if we have that before you come in, it's just like anything. Prepare well, and then in the moment, trust.
Correct.
Trust your skill set.
And I think, Bobby, if you think about potentiality from the brain's point of view, what is potentiality? Essentially, it's the brain neurons waiting to be connected. That's it. And you may have those brain connected based on your effort, based on the opportunities you had, based on your passion, your strategy, and maybe startup hasn't yet. So if I choose to see, hang on, you have the potential. They're waiting to be connected, those synapses. So, and that's true. Scientifically, that's true for all of us. So that's why when we can let them know of our beliefs around their potentiality, then it has a huge impact on their own self-belief. And that fuels the effort and strategy and support they require. And when they do that, they end up mitigating the gap that exists in the performance.
That's fascinating. I never thought about potentiality as that, like the neurons that are waiting to be connected. It's a really cool way of framing it. Now, one thing that is quite relevant to this topic, and it's a little bit if you're on the other side of it. So the Pygmalion effect, extremely powerful. Mental mindset, this wide feedback approach through David Yeager, unbelievably powerful, and a way to bring that potentiality and curiosity. Now, if you're on the other side of it in terms of receiving the golem effect or receiving microaggressions, as we said earlier, Sarab, it's a two-way street where I need to be able to bring this to your attention, and you need to be able to own the impact and create a space for me to do that. We did unpack this in detail in our last podcast in terms of the open the front door framework, and our last podcast was on rejection, and rejection often comes through these microaggressions. So if any listeners are thinking, gee, I am connected to the microaggressions and wants to have the courage to bring that up and do their 50%, I highly recommend, we'll link it in going back to that podcast, and we really unpack the open the front door method as a way to bring things up. For today, I thought we'll add to that, and from a group dynamics. So say we're all sitting at the table and we're having a really robust discussion of sense making. So sense making so important with the context of we're all inherently biased. I'd love to actually talk in detail about a strategy leaders can use that if they are, so we've got 6-7 people around the table, we need to make a really important decision, or we're undertaking sense making within that. What is a strategy, Kamala, that we can use to actually help elicit different trains of thought as opposed to our biases leading the conversation?
Yeah, listen, one of the strategies which is well known, underutilized, is something we use consciously and subconsciously now in serving our clients in having those sense-making dialogue, is the Thinking Hats, different color thinking hats by Edward de Bono. And it's simple to understand, however, it's not often utilized. But when it is, it's really powerful. The richness that comes out of the dialogue is just profound. And the way it works in practical settings, we have different heads around the table, and we are going to work on a decision. And we put the problem on the table. We discuss, but we discuss by giving license to everyone in thinking in different ways. We allow dissent to happen. We allow micro opinions to come forward. We allow people to share everything and anything they're thinking, but they don't want to share for all those reasons we discussed so far, through a structure. And the structure is where there is a chairperson who invites people to share aspects of the problem or the opportunity they are discussing that can be fairly positive. And each one of us, we are consciously now going to work it out. If this was true, what are some of the helpful aspects we could claim as a result, if this was true? So let's verbalize that. And as we discuss that, as the archaeologists unearth those artifacts of this potential complex decision we're making, we can then invite people to wear a different hat, which is of a judge, black hat. So we're allowed to make judgments why things may not work, what can go wrong with this idea or decision or anything we are discussing here. And we give space for that. And we do not frame each other by calling each other, oh, you're being a negative Nancy. We allow that to happen because that could bring up stuff that we haven't even, that could potentially be a blind spot. And then we invite the leaders who are discussing about the problem to think about they tap to their wisdom through their gut feelings without having to justify why. And when they do that, hey, I feel this way, or have this feeling, or have this intuition, and we sit with that rather than justify, ask for more details and data, and argue this is right or wrong, fact or fiction, all those things. We allow that to come onto the table and work with that. Because that's also a very good piece of data in overall decision making. Then we also give license to people to think about, all right, what are some of the data exist now? So let's honor the data here. Let's honor the facts and rationality as well. And what about creativity here? What is not done yet? We haven't seen it. However, we can imagine. So this is where, and these are all represented by different colors. So black color thinking, red color thinking, white color thinking, green color, which is all about creativity, improvements, and white being rationality, logic, all those things. And the whole white is logic and black is negative is a very stereotypical colors. But as you can see, I don't know why and how it was developed, but it is what it is. But nonetheless, it is a very powerful framework, especially when we're making sense or participating in sense making a complex scenario.
Yeah, and I love that because it provides structure. Right, and it provides structure. If I think of times I've been around a table, whether it's corporate world or sport world, and generally I'm a bit more on the quiet side. I won't speak up straight away. I like to sit and think and make connections, and then when it's time to speak, I will. But often I'll need an invite to speak, and that's something that I'm working on. But imagine, I'm just thinking back to so many scenarios. Imagine if a leader actually then goes, right, all of us now, how could this work? Could this really go well?
Yeah.
And now, okay, what wouldn't work? And in to add to that, you could go, hey, Barbie, what do you think?
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you think?
So isn't that like another way of putting it? Exactly that structure provides to legitimize that way of thinking.
Yes.
And allows for everyone to accept that it's a legitimate way of thinking for that moment. And so when you, at the beginning of the podcast, Barbie, talked about what you are wanting to actually do more of is hold two different perspectives
Yes.
at the same time. Imagine the structure being used for helping leaders and leadership teams more than that. By the way, every time we actually talk about leaders, it's not just at the individual level. It's the group dynamic is also synonymous with that.
Yeah.
So imagine if the group itself allowed for that structure and allowed to legitimize that way of thinking for that moment. It really helps de-risk any proposition moving forward.
And I think we have at-home tendencies of how we think as well. For example, I know by default, I revert back to more green way of thinking, which is creativity and improvement. And it can be annoying for people when they're managing risks and moving on and all those things. And here I am, default way of thinking. And let's say, Barbie, you could be fairly... your default could be black hat thinking, which is you may find more problems with an idea then. And if you're doing that, that could be very annoying for other people if you overly use that. And Saraf could have one that comes natural to him. But what we see in our experience working with some amazing leaders, sometimes they do struggle to work outside their default, and especially say, all right, okay, let's now focus on, once they've identified that this is right or this is wrong, once they've identified their perspective, it's very hard at times for leaders to think opposite. And this is where holding space, reflect, and allowing their discomfort, that's the magic that sense making happens.
Yeah, brilliant. And this is sense making, I suppose. This is it. If we started at the top of the podcast, what are we talking about today? The complexity that leaders have to deal with. And as you say, when we say leaders, it's not an individual, it's not a certain position. As we say, leadership is a practice.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with complexity, it's hard. It's really hard. And what are some of the constraints? Well, we all have these implicit biases. We have these shortcuts which help us function in the world. Right? Really useful, very useful. However, if we're not conscious of them, navigating complexity becomes even harder. Yet we have to do it, but the outcomes are what suffer. So we might see the golem effect. We might see people who are copying microaggressions, unable to firstly be aware that's what it is. They just know they feel uncomfortable. As a result, loads of research showing their performance and engagement will go down. And now they're feeding into the golem effect because, for example, if your performance is going down, my expectations of you are going down with you, and now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the key thing that we wanted to get across today is that the opposite is also true. Yeah. But we need to learn the skills and implement the systems. So some of those skills, a lot of the skills from one-to-one contact, if you like, is all about curiosity and high expectations. Yeah. So can I hold potential? What is possible for you, Sarab? What is possible for you, Kamwa? And if I can come into conversations with that frame, things go very, very differently.
Yeah, and Bobby, add to that, in the previous podcast we talked about is energy management.
Yes.
Right? So with that aspect, if you look through that, is if you're constantly being criticized, if you're constantly being marginalized and constantly being excluded, that's going to impact your fatigue levels. So the fatigue isn't just physically, but the dealing with that kind of microaggressions that we spoke about can be really fatiguing. And so that's where the withdrawal comes. And so it's self-perpetuating in that sense.
Yes.
Right? And like you've said, the opposite is also true. Imagine when you are included. Imagine when you are appreciated. You're gonna wake up with more energy and apply more energy, and therefore tap into more potentiality, and that's also self-perpetuating.
It's a far stretch from let's get some chess pieces on the board and then we'll hope that it works, right? There's so much more to it. And lastly, the piece that you shared about the thinking hats there, Kamar, is outstanding. And I've seen you and Sarah, and we all use it really day to day in what we do. And we help try our best to serve teams and leadership teams to help make sense of complexity. And these are just some of the tools that we love to use. There's so many more out there, and this is just a call to the listeners that anything on this topic, any questions, any ideas, please get in touch, because as you can probably hear, we're so passionate about this. We always plan to start this at 40 minutes and it ends up being an hour and a half because we're so passionate about this space and love to serve in it. And I just want to thank you, Sarah, and you, Kamar, again for your time and your energy today, and I'm really excited to continue rolling this conversation on.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbie. Thank you for shaping the conversations and making sense of these isolated ideas and coming up with a movie that makes sense.
Thanks, Barbie, and leading the conversation and keeping us kind of on track, but also allowing us to sort of express what we do. So really appreciate it.
Had to do a lot of work in the potentiality before I came in. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.